the stupid things I've done in life, you know. It was different because it's a different kind of warfare, so there were different mechanics involved with the whole thing.
You think you know The Patriot as Mel Gibson's rousing Revolutionary War epic, but the real story behind this film is a masterclass in historical distortion, sanitized brutality, and propaganda disguised as entertainment. Mel Gibson, Heath Ledger, and Roland Emmerich weren't just making a war movie. They were erasing slavery, whitewashing a vicious slave owner, and enraging historians on two continents with a fantasy version of American history that bore almost no resemblance to reality. What you're about to discover will shock you. A German director who admitted knowing nothing about the American Revolution, a composite character based on a brutal racist transformed into a noble hero, and a production where historical accuracy was deliberately sacrificed for patriotic mythology. The muskets were authentic, but almost everything else was a carefully constructed lie. Roland Emmerich, director Roland Emmerich's selection to direct The Patriot represented one of Hollywood's most ironic choices. Hiring a German filmmaker with virtually no knowledge of American history to create a patriotic Revolutionary War epic meant to inspire American audiences. But what most viewers never realized was that Emmerich's outsider status wasn't a liability to the studio. It was exactly what they wanted for a film more concerned with spectacle than historical truth. Emmerich came to The Patriot fresh off the massive success of Independence Day, which had earned over $800 million worldwide by combining American patriotism with spectacular destruction and simple good versus evil storytelling. Columbia Pictures wanted him to apply the same formula to the Revolutionary War, creating a crowd-pleasing blockbuster rather than a nuanced historical drama. His lack of deep historical knowledge meant he wouldn't be constrained by factual accuracy or burdened by the moral complexities that actually define the period. The most shocking revelation about Emmerich's approach came from his own admission during pre-production interviews that he knew very little about the American Revolution before accepting the project. He had to conduct basic research into the war's causes, major figures, and historical significance, information that most Americans learn in elementary school. This ignorance allowed him to approach the material with fresh eyes, unburdened by historical context. But it also meant he had no framework for understanding why certain creative choices might be historically offensive or educationally damaging. The academic backlash against Emmerich was swift and brutal. Professional historians published scathing articles detailing the film's countless inaccuracies, condemning its erasure of slavery, and arguing that The Patriot represented dangerous historical revisionism that would misinform audiences about America's founding. Emmerich's response was essentially to shrug, arguing that he was making entertainment rather than documentary and that audiences understood the difference, a defense that ignored how effectively film shapes historical memory. Mel Gibson, Benjamin Martin. Mel Gibson's portrayal of Benjamin Martin represented one of cinema's most successful acts of historical whitewashing, transforming Francis Marion, a brutal slave owner who tortured and murdered Native Americans, into a noble, reluctant warrior who just wanted to protect his family. This sanitization required systematically erasing the real historical figure's most defining characteristics and replacing them with Hollywood heroism that bore no resemblance to reality. The real Francis Marion, known as the Swamp Fox, was a vicious plantation owner who owned numerous slaves and participated enthusiastically in campaigns against Cherokee Indians that involved burning villages and murdering civilians. His guerrilla tactics against the British were effective, but often involved the same kind of brutality that the film attributes solely to the villains. Marion's historical reputation was built on military effectiveness rather than moral virtue, making him a poor choice for a heroic protagonist if accuracy mattered at all. Gibson's preparation for the role involved learning about colonial warfare and mastering period weapons, but it conspicuously avoided confronting the real Marion's slave ownership or participation in genocidal campaigns against indigenous peoples. Instead, Gibson and the filmmakers created a composite character who supposedly drew from multiple historical figures, allowing them to claim they weren't really portraying Marion while still using his most famous nickname and basic biography. This transparent evasion fooled no one who knew actual history. The most disturbing revelation about Gibson's involvement came from reports of his on-set behavior and his personal suggestions about how to portray slavery in the film. According to multiple sources, Gibson proposed showing slavery as a relatively benign institution where enslaved people were treated well and participated willingly in the war effort. The screenwriter reportedly had to fight against Gibson's impulse to sanitize slavery even further than the script already did, suggesting that Gibson's personal views about race were influencing his approach to the character. The Francis Marion controversy. The decision to base Benjamin Martin on Francis Marion while denying the connection created one of the film's most intellectually dishonest aspects, allowing filmmakers to exploit Marion's fame while avoiding accountability for whitewashing his brutal historical record. This creative cowardice enraged historians who understood exactly what was happening and why it was dangerous. Francis Marion's actual biography reads like a catalog of 18th century Southern brutality. He was a prosperous plantation owner who enslaved dozens of human beings, treating them as property and profiting from their forced labor. His military service included enthusiastic participation in campaigns against Cherokee communities that involved systematic village burning, crop destruction, and the forced relocation of Cherokee people destruction, and civilian murders designed to drive indigenous peoples from their lands. These weren't minor biographical details. They were central to who Marion was and how he operated. The guerrilla warfare tactics that made Marion famous involved ambushing British forces, then retreating into swamps where conventional armies couldn't follow. While militarily effective, these tactics also involved terrorizing loyalist civilians, executing prisoners, and engaging in the same kind of irregular warfare that the film portrays as villainous when British forces do it. Marion's methods were pragmatic rather than noble, designed to win an asymmetric conflict through any means necessary. The filmmaker's defensive response to criticism was to claim Benjamin Martin was a composite character drawing from multiple Revolutionary War figures, not specifically Francis Marion. This technically allowed them to deny direct historical responsibility while still benefiting from Marion's recognition and mythology. Historians viewed this defense as cowardly evasion. The character was obviously Marion in everything but explicit identification, making the composite claim a transparent fig leaf for historical distortion. Heath Ledger, Gabriel Martin. Heath Ledger's casting as Gabriel Martin, Benjamin's idealistic eldest son, came at a pivotal moment in the young Australian actor's career when he was transitioning from teen heartthrob to serious dramatic performer. His preparation for the role and his experience working with Mel Gibson would significantly influence his approach to acting and his future career trajectory in ways that extended far beyond this single film. Ledger arrived on the Patriot set following his breakout success in 10 Things I Hate About You, where he had played a charming romantic lead in a high school comedy. The Patriot represented his first major dramatic role in a big-budget studio production, creating enormous pressure to prove he could handle serious material and hold his own alongside an established star like Gibson. This transition from comedy to drama required Ledger to develop new techniques and demonstrate range that casting directors hadn't yet seen from him. The most emotionally demanding aspect of Ledger's performance was preparing for Gabriel's death scene, where the character is shot by the villainous Colonel Tavington while trying to rescue his younger brother. Ledger spent considerable time contemplating mortality and the experience of dying young with unfulfilled dreams, trying to access genuine fear and sadness rather than performing theatrical death. His approach to this scene revealed the intensity and emotional commitment that would later define his most celebrated performances. The physical training required for colonial soldier authenticity was extensive and grueling. Ledger learned to ride horses while carrying weapons, march in period military formations, and handle 18th century firearms convincingly. This physical preparation helped him embody Gabriel's transformation from idealistic young man to hardened soldier, showing the Revolutionary War's toll through his character's physical and emotional evolution. The role successfully launched Ledger's transition to dramatic leading man, opening doors to the complex characters that would define his tragically brief career. Jason Isaacs, Colonel William Tavington. Jason Isaacs' portrayal of Colonel William Tavington created one of cinema's most cartoonishly evil villains, but the secrets behind this performance reveal an actor deeply uncomfortable with the one-dimensional brutality he was required to portray. Tavington wasn't just a villain, He was a propaganda caricature designed to make American heroes look noble by comparison. The character was loosely based on British Lieutenant Colonel Banastre Tarleton, a real officer whose aggressive tactics earned him a fearsome reputation during the Revolutionary War. However, the film transformed Tarleton's historical ambiguity into pure, mustache-twirling evil. The most infamous scene, Tavington locking civilians in a church and burning them alive, never actually happened and was invented purely for dramatic impact. Isaacs later expressed regret about Tavington's lack of complexity, wishing the character had been given understandable motivations rather than existing solely as an embodiment of British villainy. His concerns were overruled by Emmerich and producers who wanted a clear antagonist audiences could hate without moral complications. British audiences and critics responded with fury to Tavington's portrayal, viewing it as anti-British propaganda that reduced their military history to Nazi-level atrocities. The controversy intensified when British veterans objected to seeing their military heritage slandered through fictional war crimes. Isaacs found himself defending a character he privately wished had been more nuanced, caught between professional obligation and personal discomfort with the role's implications. The historical inaccuracies. The Patriot's relationship with historical truth was so casual that professional historians produced entire books cataloging its distortions, inventions, and omissions. The film didn't just simplify history for dramatic purposes, it systematically rewrote events to create patriotic mythology that bore almost no resemblance to the actual Revolutionary War. The church-burning scene represented the film's most egregious fictional atrocity. No such incident occurred during the American Revolution, but the image was deliberately designed to evoke Nazi war crimes, particularly the 1944 Oradour-sur-Glane massacre, where SS troops locked French civilians in a church and set it ablaze. This calculated historical transplanting created false equivalence between British colonial forces and genocidal fascists. Battle tactics depicted throughout the film defied basic military logic and 18th century warfare conventions. The movie showed colonial militias defeating trained British regulars through impossible maneuvers, characters surviving wounds that would have been instantly fatal, and tactical decisions no competent commander would have made. These distortions weren't minor dramatic license. They fundamentally misrepresented how the Revolutionary War was actually fought. Production nightmares in South Carolina, filming The Patriot in South Carolina, where the actual Revolutionary War Southern campaign occurred, seemed like perfect authenticity. But the production became a nightmare of weather disasters, dangerous stunts, and logistical chaos that nearly shut down the entire operation multiple times. The decision to shoot on location during summer months proved catastrophically poor planning. South Carolina's brutal heat and humidity created miserable conditions for actors wearing heavy wool period costumes and leather equipment. Temperatures regularly exceeded 95 degrees with oppressive humidity, causing heat exhaustion, dehydration, and multiple medical emergencies among cast and crew members who spent hours in authentic but suffocating 18th century clothing. Hurricane season brought additional disasters that destroyed sets, flooded locations, and forced production delays that inflated the budget significantly. The elaborate colonial village constructed for key scenes suffered massive damage from storms, requiring expensive rebuilding and modifications. Weather forecasting became obsessive as producers tried to schedule filming around increasingly unpredictable tropical weather patterns. The period reconstruction efforts were staggeringly expensive and time-consuming. Production designers built entire 18th century villages from scratch using historically appropriate materials and construction techniques. These sets required months of work and enormous budgets, but they provided visual authenticity that soundstage constructions couldn't match. However, the investment proved costly when weather and accidents damaged these elaborate constructions. Legacy and aftermath. The Patriot's commercial success contrasted sharply with its critical reception and historical reputation, earning over $215 million worldwide while becoming a cautionary tale about historical distortion in mainstream cinema. The film's legacy reveals the dangerous tension between entertainment value and educational responsibility when depicting historical events. Box office performance exceeded studio expectations despite controversy. demonstrating that audiences were willing to overlook historical inaccuracy for spectacular action and patriotic storytelling. The financial success validated Hollywood's approach of prioritizing commercial appeal over factual accuracy, encouraging future historical films to take similar liberties with truth. The Academy Awards completely ignored The Patriot despite its technical achievements and commercial success, with 0 Oscar nominations reflecting Hollywood's own discomfort with the film's historical revisionism. This snubbing suggested that even the entertainment industry recognized the film had crossed ethical lines that couldn't be rewarded. The Patriot proved that sometimes the most dangerous lies are wrapped in patriotic mythology. Emmerich, Gibson, and Hollywood didn't just make a war movie, they created propaganda that erased slavery, sanitized brutality, and misinformed millions about America's founding while historians watched in horror. Subscribe to discover more shocking truths behind Hollywood's most controversial historical distortions.